Welcome to Ramsgate. So where we are now standing is the former estate of Moses Montefiore. Nowadays it's a large park, King George Memorial Park, but until around 1960, his estate, his mansion house, was located on this site. So in the page I've handed out, the top photo shows you what his estate had looked like. It was called East Cliff Lodge. It had been built in the late 18th century, and then Sir Moses rented it first from around 1822, and eventually came to purchase it around 1831, something like that. And that really then precedes his then decision to build the synagogue, which we're going to visit a little bit later. But as you can see, it's built in the kind of this Neo-Gothic style that had become quite popular at that time. And I actually have here a quote kind of describing the house a bit from that time. Says that the building forms a quadrangle and encloses a paved courtyard in which is a well of fine water. The summit is embattled, and the entire building may be considered as a specimen of the modern Gothic. This is from 1895, this description. The residence stands upon a commanding eminence from the principal front, of which are interesting views of East Kent, the Downs, the British Channel, and the coast of France. The dining room is the most elegant specimen of Gothic domestic architecture in England. So just behind me, where these trees are, is the sea. So if these trees were here, you'd be able to look at the sea. If you walk over later, just a little bit over from there, you can see the sea setting out. So essentially, the house is at the top of this kind of hill, and then there were grounds that kind of went down from the house, and you would have looked out onto the sea, right? So where we're standing now is essentially, I don't know, maybe almost where those people are in the picture in front of you, and the house would have been, you know, over here, and then the ground, you can see it's sloping down, which is where we are, and would have sloped down all the way down to the sea. So it would have been a very beautiful space that would have been here, and just to kind of like give a bit of a sense of where we are geographically, once upon a time, this area was an island, right? It's called the Isle of Thanet, right? This area still today, because once upon a time, really through the medieval period, there was a river that cut up from around where Deal is now, all the way north, and this entire part that we're on now was the Isle of Thanet. You could actually reach Canterbury nearly by boat at the time, because the river was very close to where Canterbury was, which is why it became, right, pilgrims would go there, right? It was quite accessible by the sea. Right, nowadays we think of it as being firmly inland. So really, as you then move to this early modern, then modern period, right, all of a sudden this Isle of Thanet is really quite accessible, right? It's accessible because it becomes landlocked with the rest of England. And during this period, it becomes increasingly popular as a seaside resort. So in the 18th century, right, the place you think of kind of the main resort is where? What did you say?
Brighton.
Bath. In the 18th century, right? That's very popular 18th century. But into the 19th century, people then are interested in going bathing, right? And they have these kind of contraptions that were built that you could go into the water while still being enclosed. Maybe you've seen old pictures of that, right? And so as into the 19th century, you then have this increase of interest among the wealthy, right? They don't have summer homes in France, right? The summer homes are in England on this coast, right? This eastern coast of the country. So there's lots of these mansion houses that are built here, and it's very popular. And the Montefiores, they visit this area on their honeymoon. They fall in love with it, and it first rent the estate and eventually purchased East Cliff Lodge. And from the time of its purchase, this really becomes their primary residence. While they retain obviously the home in London, as much as possible they're based here in Ramsgate. Again, this is in his 40s already, right? So he's now kind of living the grand country gentleman life, right? And it's an estate as you would expect. There's stables, right? There's kind of all the things you would expect on a estate of a wealthy, of an extremely wealthy individual. And there's a famous story that, right, that the Queen Victoria had been here as a young person, and he had given her a key to his garden. Who knows whether the story is true? But we know that royals were around here too. I mean, this was a very popular destination. The house. You can see another picture of it, I think, on the interior. If you look over on the other side, you can see a picture of Montefiore as an old man looking at a portrait of Lady Judith, who is already deceased, and it's in one of the rooms inside. So again, you can see that Gothic architecture of the interior. Apparently he loved the library, especially within the house. It could be that's where this painting is being done. It will remain in the Montefiore family even after his death. They don't have any children. We'll talk more about that later, but it'll pass to a nephew of Montefiore, whose name is Joseph Sebag. Right, becomes Sebag Montefiore. He adopts the name, his sister's son, and the house that will eventually, as many mansion houses do in this country, kind of following the Second World War, fall into disrepair. They no longer can maintain the upkeep. The house has actually been transferred to the locality here. They can't pay to protect the house anymore from vandalism, to kind of give the kind of upkeep that a house like that needs to actually be functioning. And so they decide to simply demolish it. And so it's demolished in the 1960s, and it's turned into a public park, so people can enjoy the space. So as we saw when we came in, there's a few bits of the original building that remain. There is what became known, or what was known as, the Italian greenhouse. Probably not because I mean the greenhouse, but there was something in front of it that was Italian. Maybe a statue or something, became known as the Italian greenhouse. There's the gatehouse that we saw that has that Gothic architecture, and apparently there's some stable buildings as well that still survive in that area. So there's a few bits that give you a sense of what it looked like. But for our story, one of the things we'll look at is it's only a 10-minute walk from where they will build their synagogue. And so it would have been quite convenient for them to be here and to then, attend services there. So hopefully after this, we'll have the opportunity to go visit the synagogue, and for those who'd like to walk, we can kind of recreate the experience of what it would have been like for Montefiore on Shabbat morning to take his stroll over to his personal, private synagogue.
So do they have a rabbi and everything?
They do, yeah.
How many Jews lived in 1800s?
So in terms of what's here Jewishly before Montefiore, the answer is not much. There are records of some Jewish people that are living here from the 18th century. Sorry? No, silversmith. We know that there was a silversmith here, a tailor. We have a bit of the records of kind of what they were. Obviously, it's close to France, from over here. But what you do find is that any Jews who are living here, they tend to be members of a synagogue that had been established in Canterbury. And so Canterbury had a small Jewish community. Actually, that's where the Jewish cemetery was. Eventually, there will be a cemetery in Ramsgate that will be kind of into the 1860s, so a bit later. But originally, anyone who was here probably would have been members in Canterbury, would go there for the Chagim, but there wasn't any, shall we say, pre-existing Jewish community in the term of what we think of a community, of a group of people, until Montefiore arrives here and eventually establishes essentially a community around him. And so it very much fits into that kind of image we have of these estate homes of English gentlemen that would have had, you know, their manor house, and then would have had their church, would have had their priest, right, and so on, right? So Montefiore is going to have a very similar kind of model, but of course a synagogue and a rabbi and a Jewish community around him. So when we get to the synagogue, we'll talk more about how he went about creating not just a place for him to live, but actually a Jewish community in which he would be able to live a full Jewish life, which, as we said when we were at Bevis Marks earlier, was something that was really important to him, meaning he was committed synagogue goer, he was committed to keeping kosher and so on. And so having this estate in the middle of nowhere, normally we would think of as something you do when you're looking to distance yourself from active Jewish life. And we know many English Jews took that route, right? To kind of do what other people were doing. But without Jewish life around you, essentially it meant that if that's where you're spending your weekends, you're spending your Jewish life in isolation. And typically that then leads to, right, the assimilation, amalgamation into the broader population. That was not the approach Montefiore had. So, but he still wanted to experience having a beautiful estate. So he basically will bring the Jewish community to him as a way to ensure that he can live, have, shall we say, in his view, the best of both worlds. Both the experience of having a grand estate, but also be able to continue living a religious Jewish lifestyle.
Do we know if he had...
So the question was, did he have Jewish servants to help run the estate? So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we know he had personal assistant, and we know that he had his own shochet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
But in terms of the household, we don't know. But interestingly, Lady Judith Montefiore publishes a cookbook in English, which is the first English language kosher cookbook ever to be published. She publishes it anonymously. It's known as the Jewish Manual. It's published somewhere around 1850, and it contains both Sephardi and Ashkenazi recipes, because she was Ashkenazi. We'll talk maybe more about that later. But importantly, it contains English recipes, but with recipes that allow them to be kosher, right? So no mixing of milk and meat, obviously no pork. So you'll find recipes like mock turtle, right? Which is not turtle, but it was a popular recipe. So she has a kosher version of how to do that. So oftentimes within these manor houses, the lady of the manor would still oversee the kitchen. So she was probably still maybe working with the staff on what they would need to prepare, how they would need to prepare it. But I don't know that it necessarily meant that any of the actual kitchen staff would have been Jewish. But again, perhaps some of these other religious functionaries that he had would have helped maybe oversee the kashrut of it in terms of whatever would have been necessary from a kosher standpoint.
Also, the houses that size needs a lot of staff.
Yes.
And that would be a real basis to growing the community. So,
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You kind of could bring your community from your staff.
Yeah.
I haven't read that.
Okay.
It may in fact be the case. I saw that a couple of years ago someone actually published apparently a more extensive work looking at the history of the estate. I'm now keen to purchase it, and I'll see whether there's more information in there about the running of the estate. The one thing that makes some of this research difficult is basically Montefiore's records were all destroyed at the time of his death. It seems that it probably was an intentional fire set. Why exactly the records were destroyed you never know. Sometimes it's done, we know from different instances, sometimes it's done because you have something you don't want people to know about. Sometimes it has to do with humility, right? Not wanting to kind of, make a whole thing about who you were. Some of his things were saved, testimonials and so on. We have some diaries that have survived, but kind of the majority of the correspondence, he received correspondence from all over the Jewish world. So it's a real shame that it was lost, because it's a real insight into those decades of activity. A lot of them were lost.
He must have.